Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, let's forget the day-to-day market noise for a bit.
Yeah, let's step back.
Today, we're going right back to square one, really. The absolute foundation of understanding your money.
We're talking about assets versus liabilities.
Exactly. And why getting this one, a fairly simple idea is, well, according to our source today, it's the master key to building wealth.
And the source is pretty foundational itself. We're pulling from Chapter 2, Lesson 2 of Part 2.pdf. This isn't about fancy investment strategies.
No, not at all.
It's really about a fundamental shift in how you look at money. It feels almost revolutionary because it's just so straightforward.
It really does. So our mission here is just to unpack what's laid out in these pages. We want to get to the core of what really counts for long-term financial health.
Using the language, the example, straight from the source material.
Yep. Simple, powerful stuff. Let's dive in.
Okay, so the source kicks things off with a pretty bold statement. Building wealth. It's not really about how much money you make. Your salary, your income, that's not the main thing. It's about how much money you actually keep. And then, crucially, how you make that money work for you.
Right. That already cuts against the grain, doesn't it? Everyone focuses on the paycheck size.
Totally. But the source gives this great little story. It contrasts the author's friend, Mike, who inherited this huge business empire from his dad.
A massive responsibility, I imagine.
Huge.
Yeah.
Basically inherited a high-paying job, right? But the author himself managed to retire much earlier, at 47, and his wife, Kim, even earlier, 37.
Wow. So how did they manage that without the empire?
Because their assets had grown. They'd built up enough assets that were generating income all by themselves. The source uses this nice analogy of planting a tree.
Okay.
You water it, you care for it for years. Then one day, it's big enough to provide shade, produce fruit, and it just keeps growing without you constantly tending it.
Ah, so their finances became self-sustaining, like that tree.
Exactly. Their assets were doing the work.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And you see the common misunderstanding reflected in the questions the author says he always gets.
Oh, yeah. How do I start? What book should I read? How do I teach my kids?
That's your secret.
And the big one.
How do I make millions? Right. All focused on getting money.
Yeah.
Now, the source doesn't dismiss intelligence. It says intelligence solves problems, and it produces money. That's true. But, and this is the key point, money without financial intelligence, well, that's money that tends to disappear pretty quickly.
Ah, okay. So it's not just about making it. It's about understanding how money works. That specific financial literacy.
You need that to keep it, to protect it, and definitely to grow it.
Which leaves us into this really striking historical example the source uses. It perfectly illustrates the danger of only chasing the dollar signs.
Right. The story of that meeting back in 1923. At the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago.
Yeah, who's there again? It's like a who's who of American wealth. Oh, absolutely. The biggest names. You had Charles Schwab, the steel magnate, Samuel Insull, big in utilities, Howard Hobson, gas industry leader, Ivar Kruger, the match king and international financier.
Titans of industry.
And more. Leon Fraser, head of a major bank. Richard Whitney, president of the New York Stock Exchange, famous speculators like Jesse Livermore, even government figures like Albert Fall, who was in the president's cabinet, plus Mellon, Ford, Baker, Sage, Rockefeller. I mean, the absolute pinnacle of wealth and power at that time.
You'd think, okay, these guys have cracked it. They're set for life, multiple generations.
That's what you'd assume, right? With all that power, connections, business smarts.
But then the source hits you with what happened to them just 25 years later. And well, it's pretty grim.
It's genuinely shocking. Schwab died penniless. Insull died broke overseas. Kruger, the match king, and Livermore, the speculator, both committed suicide.
Good grief.
Howard Hobson apparently went insane. Whitney and Fall actually served time in prison. It's a really sobering list.
How? I mean, how does that happen? These weren't just lucky inheritors. They built or ran massive enterprises. They clearly knew how to make money.
Well, the source suggests that just having the money, even vast amounts, wasn't enough protection. They lived through booms and busts just like everyone else.
Right.
And navigating those requires more than just business acumen. It requires adaptability, maybe an open mind, and that specific financial intelligence we were talking about.
So maybe they were great at building a business, generating income, but not necessarily great at, like, managing wealth itself, protecting it.
That seems to be the implication. Perhaps they focus too much on the making of money and not enough on the principles of keeping and growing it through changing times. The source frames it as neglecting their greatest asset, their financial education.
And you see echoes of that today, maybe on a smaller scale, but still. You hear about lottery winners.
Athletes, celebrities.
Yeah, people who suddenly come into a lot of money, make millions fast, and then somehow end up broke a few years later.
Exactly. They might be brilliant in their field or incredibly lucky they can generate huge income.
But they don't know the rules of the other game.
Right. The game of managing money, of keeping it, of making it last, they lack that financial literacy foundation.
Which brings us right back to the core lesson from the rich dad figure in the source.
His focus wasn't just on keeping it, but on how many generations you can keep it going.
That's a whole different time scale, a different mindset.
Completely. And this highlights a big problem, according to the source, with our standard education system.
How so?
It uses this analogy of building a house. School teaches you valuable skills, absolutely. Reading, writing, professional training.
Yeah.
That's like pouring a solid, maybe 6-inch concrete slab. It gives you a base to get a job and earn.
Okay, that makes sense. A foundation for a career.
But the source argues it often fails completely to teach you how to dig deep, how to build the kind of foundation you need for a skyscraper. For real, lasting wealth.
Ah, so you get people who are incredibly smart professionally, top of their class.
Highly educated, great earners.
But they graduate with almost zero financial foundation. They know how to work for money, but not how money itself works or how to build something durable with it.
Exactly. And that lack of foundation leads straight to what the source calls the only rule you truly need to know if you want to build wealth. The absolute must-know principle.
Okay, let's hear it. The one rule.
You have to know the difference between an asset and a liability. Simple as that.
Right.
And you have to buy assets.
Okay.
The source puts it very directly. Rich people acquire assets. The poor and middle class acquire liabilities that they think are assets.
That sounds deceptively simple.
It really is. And the source points out that this very simplicity can sometimes trip people up. Especially highly educated people who are maybe looking for complexity.
Right, they expect some intricate formula.
Yeah. Kids get the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupor. But adults sometimes complicate things. Financial professionals, even with good intentions, can sometimes muddy these basic waters.
So let's get those super simple definitions again, the ones the source uses.
Okay. Asset. Puts money in my pocket.
Okay, money flows in.
Liability. Takes money out of my pocket.
Money flows out. Got it, that's it.
That's the fundamental test. And the source emphasizes that financial statements, your income statement, your balance sheet, they aren't just numbers. They tell a story.
A story about your money.
Exactly. Where it comes from, where it goes. If you can't read that story because you're illiterate with words or numbers, as the source puts it, that's the root of financial struggle, you don't understand your own plot.
And to help visualize this story, the source uses these simple diagrams, right? Cash flow patterns.
Yes. You've got the income statement, income versus expenses, and the balance sheet, assets versus liabilities, the relationship, the flow between them. That's everything.
Okay, so show me the flow for an asset.
All right. Imagine the balance sheet with an assets column. An arrow goes from that asset column up into the income column on the income statement.
Because the asset is generating income, putting money in your pocket. Makes sense.
Now, the liability. On the balance sheet, you have the liabilities column. An arrow goes from that column across into the expenses column on the income statement.
Because the liability costs you money. It creates an expense, takes money out. Okay, clear.
These two basic flows, repeated over time, create the financial reality for different groups.
Right. The source shows patterns for the poor, middle class, and rich. Let's walk through those. The poor person first.
Okay. Diagram for a poor person. Income statement. Main income source is a job, salary. Arrow from job to income. Then, basically, one big arrow goes straight from income out to expenses.
Covering basics.
Yeah. Taxes, food, rent, transport, clothes, just survival stuff. And crucially, look at their balance sheet.
Empty.
Pretty much. Minimal assets, maybe few liabilities because credit is hard to get. The money comes in from the job and goes straight out for expenses, no accumulation.
Okay. Now, the middle class, this is where it gets interesting and maybe a bit depressing.
This is the pattern many people find themselves in. Income statement. Again, income mainly from a job salary. Arrow from job to income. But then look where the income flows out to expenses.
Okay, taxes, yeah. But also mortgage payment, car payment, credit card payments, maybe student loans.
Exactly. Now look at their balance sheet, assets column. Often pretty small, maybe empty in terms of things that actually produce income.
Right.
But the liabilities column, that's usually full. Mortgage debt, car loans, credit card debt, school loans.
Okay, I see it.
And the killer is the cash flow arrow. It goes from their income down to feed those liabilities and then across into expenses.
So the income isn't buying assets, it's servicing debt. Paying for the house, the car, the stuff bought on credit, which are liabilities because they take money out.
Precisely. The payments themselves are expenses generated by the liabilities. And this cycle, this is what the source calls the rat race.
You work hard, earn more, but the money just flows out to cover the cost of the liabilities you've acquired. You're stuck on a treadmill.
You got it. Income fuels expenses and feeds liabilities. Very little, if anything, is left to buy actual income-producing assets.
Okay, so contrast that with the rich person's diagram. It must be the opposite flow.
Exactly. It's a mirror image in terms of where the primary focus is. Income statement. The main income isn't from a job.
It's coming from
the assets column on the balance sheet. Arrows flow from assets like real estate, stocks, bonds, notes, intellectual property.
things that pay them.
Right. These generate rent, dividends, interest, royalties flowing up into the income column.
Okay, and then where does that income go?
It flows over to cover expenses, taxes, maybe mortgage payments, but often these expenses are small relative to the asset-generated income. In the balance sheet,
Asset column must be large and growing.
large and growing, liabilities are usually managed, maybe strategically taken on to acquire more assets, but they're kept small relative to the assets.
And the key difference in the flow.
The income comes from the assets. It covers expenses. And then this is critical. The excess income flows right back down into the asset column.
To buy more assets.
To buy more assets, which then generate more income, which buys more assets. It's a positive feedback loop. Wealth building on autopilot, essentially.
That visual contrast is powerful. Now let's tackle maybe the most challenging idea in this section for a lot of people, the house.
Ah, yes. The idea that your personal home, your primary residence, is often a liability, not an asset.
Which feels wrong to many.
Yeah.
It's the biggest purchase they make, the American dream, their main investment.
It absolutely challenges core beliefs. And the source has a diagram showing this difference in perspective. The poor dad puts the house in his asset column, hoping it appreciates. The rich dad puts his personal residence squarely in the liability column.
Why? Just based on those simple definitions again.
Exactly. Does your house, the one you live in, put money in your pocket each month?
Well, no. I pay the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, upkeep, utilities. Money flows out consistently.
Bingo. That's the definition of a liability according to the source. The cash flow is negative. Yes, it might appreciate over many years, but that's a potential future gain, not regular income in your pocket now.
So that monthly outflow is the key. It's an expense generator.
Right. And the source points out 3 hidden costs when people view their home only as an asset. First, loss of time.
Meaning?
The time that money is tied up in the house, it could have been used to buy actual income-producing assets. Time is a factor in compounding. Second, loss of additional capital.
All those payments.
Mortgage, taxes, insurance, repairs. That's capital that could have been invested elsewhere to generate returns. And third, maybe the most insidious, loss of education.
How does owning a home stop you from learning?
Because people often think, my house is my main asset, my retirement plan. They feel financially secure, so they start actively learning about investing, about acquiring other assets that actually produce passive income. They park their financial future in the house and stop building a real financial engine.
Wow. That third one. That really hits home, no pun intended. It creates a false sense of security.
And it loops right back to why the middle class gets stuck in that rat race.
Because as their income goes up,
so do their expenses. Taxes go up with income. Bracket creep, the source calls it. But also, lifestyle inflation kicks in. You earn more, you buy a bigger house, bigger liability, bigger expenses, a nicer car, another liability, more furniture, more stuff.
often financed with debt, right? Credit becomes easier to get.
Exactly. So liabilities increase, bigger mortgage, more car loans, higher credit card balances. The pattern just digs deeper.
So you work harder, get a raise.
And that extra money immediately flows out to higher taxes, bigger debt payments. You're running faster on the wheel, but not actually getting ahead financially. Your increased effort is primarily benefiting the government, the bank, your employer, before it benefits you.
So the diagrams really show opposing forces. Rich, assets grow, generate income, income buys more assets. Middle class, income pays expenses and services growing liabilities.
That's the core visual. Rich people acquire things that pay them. Middle class people acquire things they have to pay for, often thinking they're assets. That's the fundamental divergence.
Which leads to that pointed question from the source.
Yeah.
If you're an employee and a homeowner, Where does your actual effort, your work, go?
Yeah. The source breaks it down. You work for your company, obviously, for your paycheck.
Right.
You work for the government. They take taxes out before you even see the money, and often a bigger chunk as you earn more.
Okay.
And you work for the bank, paying off that mortgage, the car loan, the credit cards. Your effort serves these three masters first.
So just working harder at your job within that structure.
Means a bigger slice of that extra effort goes to those other entities first. The source isn't saying don't work hard, but it's urging a shift in focus.
I'm just earning more to
concentrating your energy on acquiring income-producing assets. Build your own engine. Don't just power someone else's.
Okay, so how do we measure progress towards this goal? Is there a different way to think about wealth?
The source brings in a definition from R. Buckminster Fuller. He defined wealth not by net worth on paper, but
How?
how many days could you survive financially if you stopped working today?
Oh, wow. That completely reframes it. It's about financial runway, about sustainability.
Exactly. Not just a big number, but how long your assets can support you.
So the goal then becomes,
To get to the point where the income generated by your assets is greater than your monthly expenses,
once you hit that point.
you're financially independent, you don't need the job anymore, your assets cover your life.
And the way to get there, following the rich pattern.
It's straightforward in concept. Keep your expenses relatively low. Use the income from your assets to cover those expenses. Then take all the excess cash flow generated by your asset.
And plow it back into.
Buying more assets. Make that asset column grow faster and faster and generates more income, which buys more assets. The cycle accelerates.
So after all these diagrams, definitions, examples, what's the simple takeaway observation the source leaves us with?
It boils down to this, really starkly put. The rich buy assets. The poor only have expenses.
Right.
And the middle class buy liabilities they think are assets.
That's blunt. But it captures the essence of those cash flow patterns, doesn't it?
It really does. The source argues that the single difference understanding assets versus liabilities and acting accordingly is the fundamental driver of whether people struggle or succeed financially.
It definitely forces you to look at your own situation through a new lens. Ask yourself, am I mainly working for a paycheck to cover bills and pay down debt?
Or am I actively, strategically using my resources, time and money to acquire things that will actually pay me back consistently?
So maybe take a minute after this. Look at what you consider your valuable possessions, your assets. Apply that simple test from the source. Does this put money in my pocket regularly or take money out?
Yeah. And then imagine what could change if you consciously shifted your focus, your energy, your spending towards acquiring things that generate income instead of things that just generate bills.
That mental shift, that reframing.
Yeah.
It seems to be the real deep dive lesson here.
Absolutely. It's about changing the direction of your cash flow.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive into assets, liabilities, and the cash flow patterns that shape our financial lives, all based on the insights from Part 2.pdf.